everything is just one great being. We're all God. That's what Jesus was talking about. That's what Buddha was talking about. It's recognizing the divinity in you. What I did as a child, I said, I'm going to, instead of waiting for the Messiah to show up, what if everybody picked up their torture stake and behaved and did the things that they had expected the Messiah to do? Everything in the universe, as above, so below, like Billy Carson always talks about. Everything has an equal and opposite. It has to mate. Mating is a big part of what we do. Because I've discovered these wave conjugations, every person on the planet that's been thinking about it will now have ideas concerning, but not just us, but all humanoids throughout the entire universe will now get that same resonance and be able to apply it, like the experiments with the rats.
Right.
You teach a rat something here in London, and then in New York you find the rats are doing the same thing.
Right.
Spontaneously, because of the morphic resonance, because we are all connected on this ether, and that waveform that's the consciousness. We are all just one great being.
Yeah.
That's what they forget. We're not separate. The universe is probably one cell inside of some super organism.
Right.
And we're just little who, little who's like Horton hears a who and trying to make sense of it. And it's a beautiful thing that we're making sense of it. But everything is just one great being. We're all God. That's what Jesus was talking about. That's what Buddha was talking about. It's recognizing the divinity in you. What I did as a child, I said, I'm going to, instead of waiting for the Messiah to show up, what if everybody picked up their torture stake and behaved and did the things that they had expected the Messiah to do? What if everybody just for one day walked around and behaved as if they were God himself and did the things that they would expect the Creator? And we know God can't just be a male, because no man can produce a child without a female. Everything in the universe, as above, so below, like Billy Carson always talks about. You can't, everything has an equal and opposite. It has to mate. Mating is a big part of what we do. The boron mates with nitrogen, and that's how the carbon happens. Everything inside of us, all our cells, they're mating. There's a relationship going on in it. Everything's alive. There is no death, but that the Bible talked about a mechanistic world. God took dirt and blew into it the breath of life, and it came to life. But if you look at the Brownian effect, what is breathing? Going from positive to negative. And they see all these, even the plastic that makes these things up are still going from, it's still carbon, polarizing from positive to negative. Breathing in, breathing out. It's just under a different state of matter, but there is no death. There's no death. Everything's eternal. And once we get rid of the idea, okay, you're going to die and disappear, then they don't have any grasp over you anymore. And to be free, the truth will set you free. That's why I was like, okay, well, if this truth caused me this lifetime, then wonderful, I've accomplished what I needed to do. Because I think in the previous lifetime, I was supposed to do these things and I didn't. And that's why it's been so hard for me. And that's why I've pushed so hard to get these things out, because
So you felt like that, like from the womb?
From the womb, I had to get this done.
So you felt like you had these things that you didn't get out in a previous lifetime, and now you feel like an unstoppable urge.
I have to at all costs. And so now what I would love to do is invite Neil deGrasse, any astrophysicist, any chemist, anyone in any field of science, to sit down with me and examine these patterns, examine the supersymmetrical systems that I've developed. So I reached out to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I saw him at an event up front, at Fox. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. I would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you. and it was only 36 pages. It was a treatise. And I told him it was controversial, and I sent him over the 36-page thing that had the wave conjugations in it, but I started it off with 1 times 1 equaling 2. And he went in on my treatise, redlined everything. He attacked that I had talked about Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and John Keeley and Tesla as the people that I looked up to. Mm-hmm. He attacked them, but then he started attacking, the 1 times 1 equaling 2. Because I asked him, I said, under what conditions? I said, it's illogical where the square root of a number added to itself will equal more than that number squared. But that's what happens with the square root of 2. That's what happens with most of the numbers. I was like, how is it that multiplication, if it means to make more and increase a number, how is 1 times 1 equaling 1 part of the multiplication table? Now, I understand that if you're seeing it one time, but we call that once. But the moment that you add the times in there, that multiplicative indicator, that means there's more than one. So now each equation is supposed to be balanced. That equal sign is supposed to show that there's a balance between these two numbers over here and a balance on this one over here. What happened to the other one in this equation? He was like, well, Tesla stuff worked, but Tesla was never really respected and out there. And he wanted me to support Bohr or Schringer or Feynman or any of those people. And I'm looking at the Feynman diagrams. I'm like, you made all these things up. You're basically doing the Mr. Spock thing. If you want to find the answer to something, then you cancel out all the possibilities. All other possibilities, and you root it down to one thing. So that means going through the whole universe to answer one question. And that's the problem with probability. That's the problem with Heisenberg uncertainty. That's the problem with Schrodinger. All of those were just these probabilities because they had taken the ether out. They forgot the electromagnetic wave. It had to have a medium in which it followed on. It had to have something in which it was moving on. It cannot be the cause of its own action. An effect can never be the cause of the action. Mm-hmm. And what Einstein left was the equal and opposite of magnetism. So back to Neil deGrasse, when he wrote his response to my paper, and he said, if you have any other questions, you're going to have to see somebody else, and he wouldn't take my calls anymore. I was like, okay, so I wrote the book based off of those responses. The reason I wanted to talk to him was because of his show, The Cosmos. The very first episode he had was talking about Giordano Bruno. Mm-hmm. And he said that Giordano Bruno was looking for that grand unified field equation, and maybe one day somebody is going to do it. And when they do it, it's going to change the world. And I'm like, dude, I've done it. I've got it here. He attacked it with such vitriol that I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to walk away from this. Dr. David Tong from Cambridge, a professor at Cambridge, did a video on physics of the world, and he said it's all a lie. And he explained that there was these 16 fields, and they gave the best understanding and interpretation that they had of it. But it was all a lie because they didn't understand how it worked. Why? Because the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887, where they were trying to define the ether or the earth in this etheric space. Problem was, they kept with Newtonian laws, so they thought the ether didn't move. They thought it was still because they could not get out of the ether. They couldn't step outside of the ether because it's everything around us. So they couldn't tell a difference, whether they saw no result, no change. So they assumed there was a void, that there was no ether there. And that's when particle physics took off. Lorentz, a great physicist that everybody loved, entered a paper in 1904 where he was continually explaining the ether the same way that Maxwell All of his theories came off of there being an ether, but he was still limited by Newtonian laws and the Coulomb force of opposites attracting. When it's the positive, it's the things that are alike that attract. But he believed that the ether was still and space was flat. And so Einstein relativity came as a result of them taking the ether away. And for 100 years, we've walked down this particle physics world that's all theoretical. And here I've patented these wave conjugations that is the ether, is the contraction of the ether and the expansion of it. And on top of that, the proof of it was I've been able to build new industries from it. And so now what I would love to do is invite Neil deGrasse and David Tong or any astrophysicist, any chemist, anyone in any field of science to sit down with me and examine these patents, examine the supersymmetrical systems that I've developed. We've been fooled by our senses. Our eyes see 0.05% of the entire electromagnetic wave. We're blind cosmically, but we judge everything by what we see. And they've done that with science for so many years. You look at E equals MC squared. That talks about expansion. It does not show how it's divided. If ever you've never breathed in twice without breathing out. You breathe in and you breathe out. You charge and you discharge. They're acting as if the universe is just expanding out, breathing out, and it's going to dissipate out, and they never include the contractive side of it, breathing in, because they were misled by Newton, who said everything moves in a straight line unless affected by something else. And we know that not to be true. But they built the entire two-dimensional plane, the Euclidean space that we live on, that we work on, that we try and define curved nature by two-dimensional space, and we never include the curvature, the breathing in. Like, everything has to have the balance, the electric side and the magnetic side. You remember the Michelson-Morley experiment? They were trying to prove whether there was an ether or an effect of an ether, or the quintessence that everything came from. That used to be called the fifth element, that everything that from antiquity, everyone understood that something doesn't come out of nothing. It's like when you look at the air, it looks clear, but you change the pressure condition. The balance of the change of pressure condition, we call that condensation. It creates clouds. And you change the motion conditions, whether it's moving quickly or slowly, it's going to become snow, it's going to become rain, it's going to become hell. So everything comes down to just one of two forces. Either you're breathing in and filling up something, or you're pouring it out. But the scientists, they ignored Walter Russell's work because he didn't include any equations inside of it. He talked philosophically regarding how things behave in comparison to laying down and following some Newtonian or calculus writing. He said he based things based on let's explore them naturally. And that's what I did with my book. Once what Walter Russell was missing, he didn't have the wave conjugations. He didn't have the mirror shapes, the all shapes. And that was because of a mistake that was made 6,000 years ago, maybe. They took the flower of life, which was that symbol. Instead of following the natural curvature of these 64 circles overlapping, they averaged the space where they met. And they invented straight lines because they believed that the world was flat. Because that's how they thought everything came down, to straight lines. They thought the world was flat. And I was like, oh my goodness, they didn't open the flower properly. Why don't you just take the pieces that make up the flower and put them together based on universal ratios? So this is the juxtapose of the mistake they made. I took 4 of those triangles. This is what happens when 4 bubbles meet. This is the negative space where they can't touch each other. This is hydrogen. And as I was saying, electricity is always trying to get to the center of that triangle, but it gets pushed out. And now you see it has 4 contractive poles, which is the electric poles. It has 4 contractive poles because electricity is seeking a higher pressure condition and forcing it in, where magnetism is seeking a lower pressure condition and spun out. So the vortices, those tips, that's the magnetic field. That's where they begin. But it has an equal attractor and an equal amount of repulsion. They gave me the patents to that. I called that the tetrient. So if you go to what happens when 8 bubbles meet, this is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, but you'll notice it has 8 contractive poles, but it only has 6 magnetic poles, 6 vortices, so it has a greater electrical potential than a repulsion. So maybe this is the strong nuclear force, and the previous one was the weak nuclear force. So I was like, okay, I called this the Huntian after my son. So I was like, what happens when 6 bubbles meet? Now you see that it has these huge bubbles, fast moving, but there's 6 strong spheres that's going around this, but the greater attractor has grabbed the 2 weaker attractors. And this looks just like a photon, and guess what? It has 30 poles. This looks like what happens in nature. So I was like, okay, so they gave me the patents to this, but you'll see that there's 6 unaccounted electrical poles to it. So I was like, what happens when 12 bubbles meet? Another stable structure that we basically see in nature, but there's 4 unaccounted electrical poles to it. You'll see 1 at the bottom and 3 on those sides. This is the basis of crystallization, laws of crystallization that forms. And I was like, what happens when 24 bubbles meet? This is a negative space where 24 bubbles meet. This is where you cannot distinguish this from the background because all of the electrical potential has been accounted for. This would be the Bose-Einstein condensate, where something becomes indistinguishable from the fabric of space itself, the final state of matter. And the proof of this, the Platonic solids, they have a thing called discrete symmetry. You can put the cubes together, maybe you can put the dodecahedrons together, but you can't put all of them together. But you can take the wave conjugations right here, and they form supersymmetrical systems where everything aligns. What makes more sense? Where they invented straight lines in opening the flower, or where you actually take the individual pieces of the flower and put it together based on universal ratios? Which one do you think is how the givers of that knowledge intended for us to use it? Like I've said a number of times, you show me a real straight line in nature. Everything is expressed in motion. All motion expressed in waves. All waves were curved. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the greater the action, the greater the reaction. The greater the reaction, the greater the resistance. The greater the resistance, the greater the curvature. Because the universe is based off of equanimity, which Einstein left out in his theory of relativity, the balancing side of the gravity, Einstein left that out of his equation because he coupled electricity and magnetism together and didn't realize that electricity was the equal and opposite of magnetism. Electricity being the contractive field, you breathe in, that's a contractive thing. You breathe out, that's a magnetic thing, a radiative thing. But they use the term magnet as an attractor. But to magnify something means to what? Make it larger, increase the space. That's the work of radiation. That's what Walter Russell was talking about all those years. That's the work of radiation. It's the electricity between the things that pull them together. The Coulomb force that supposedly opposites attract and push each other away. If that was true, then hot air and cold air would seek each other out. They're the same substance, but in a different state. They move in opposite directions from each other. The reason 2 magnets seem like the North Pole is attracted to the South Pole, because if you had 2 rivers or 2 holes with water coming out of them and you pointed them at each other, what are they going to do? They're going to be pushing against each other. But they align to where the male enters the female and is able to come out. Everything in the universe is just electricity. And we call it magnetism when it's devitalized, but it's still electricity. We call the radiative side, it's the feminine side. And the contractive side is the positive, masculine side. It's a balance, and it's never been anything but that balance, and we've complicated it. You have all these physicists that's saying something different, but none of them have 97 patents. None of them have introduced a new form of flight with unlimited mid-air bonding. None of them have discovered 4 supersymmetrical systems. This is what we've done. This is what the collective is able to do when you put yourself into the divine space. Way. Like there's tons of paperwork of Da Vinci working on the flower of life and trying to unravel it. But every single existence, every single example, you see him making straight lines and trying to make these straight lines bend in, and therefore he was never able to open it up. Because all the universe is curved, all space is curved. And as a result, what I was doing in trying to find these straight lines, I abandoned the idea of the straight line. The shortest distance between 2 points is curved space, because you cannot force your way straight through space. Even electricity, as it moves from a southern plane to a northern plane, it always goes northeast in its direction. And magnetism, as it expands out, it goes southwesterly. And that's the spin. That's how you always know whether it's magnetism or electricity. It's the spin. Is it northeast or is it southwest? But in trying to define curved matter, I'm so sorry, I get so distracted. Trying to define the spaces, it allowed me to see that all of these in between, what we have been dealing with is these petals. All of mankind have dealt with these petals, but it's these other shapes that we've ignored constantly. Well, those other shapes were the in-between spaces. They were the things that filled up the vacuum of space. And all these particles that I have, I think are the full proof of that. And it is also the full proof of the wave-particle argument.
Terrence Howard says it's all about chemical reactions. He wonders why every bubble we blow turns into a circle.
Everything is based on chemical reactions. In order for me to become a character, I have to change my chemical composition of how I'm thinking, and as a result, that changes how I position myself, which changes how the heat is generated and transferred out in and out of my body. Everything comes down to chemistry. So acting in physics, in physics, when two things are drawn to each other, it's because they are of similar charge. It's not positive, because they say negatives attract. But cold air drops down. Does it attract to the hot air rising up? No, it passes right by each other. Because negatives, opposites don't attract, it's positives that attract to each other. Two positives drawn to each other, two negatives discharge each other. So it's all about physics to me. It's all about chemistry, and it's how the physics, how another actor is relating to me. A slight change in his body language changes my tone. It's all physics. And I came out and I was born. The first thing I thought about when I was 5 years old, I was obsessed with bubbles. I was like, why does a bubble take the shape of a ball? Why not a square or a triangle? And I would go and try and make square or triangular bubbles. And you could never do it, because it turns out everything expands as a sphere and everything contracts in geometric form. You drop a pebble into the pond, it expands in a perfect sphere unless there's something in the way. The moment it hits the edge of the shore and starts to come back, it's the contracting waves that hit the expanding waves that creates the initial geometries. Everything expands as a sphere, everything contracts in geometry and fits, basically. So what I'm saying, and what I tried to tell you guys earlier, this is not your first time, it's not your first rodeo, and it won't be your last rodeo. Don't panic in this life. You can actually, there's no sense of everything goes to sleep and it wakes back up again. Refolds and unfolds, refolds and unfolds. And if you're wise, if you're careful, Because you can remember conscious moments in your life, can't you? You can remember moments when you're like, wait a minute, I'm in a bigger space than just this little body right here. You become fully aware of everything around you. And if you quiet yourself, you can think about those things. Well, apparently I did that at the last passage, because when I came into this life, I woke up, remember, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. And the first thing I did was work out the flower of life. When I was 6 years old, I started making these pieces.
Terrence Howard credits his research breakthroughs to energy from his past life. Are we just carrying echoes from before, or is there something more to it?
What Da Vinci tried to do at 80, I did at 6 years old because I had been working on it perhaps from a past life. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm crazy or this reincarnation or anything, but we know that energy just reboots itself. So we are eternal, so stop panicking, thinking your life is over. You've done this trillions of times. You'll get good at it and we'll be perfect one time if we get conscious. But we have to get conscious, because I can either say I'm the smartest man in the world, that I figured out what nobody else in the world could figure out. With Aristotle, with Plato, Pythagoras, all of them tried to figure this out, but I know I am not smarter than these men. So I know that there's something to the consciousness of carrying things through, because the information and the knowledge that I have, I didn't go to school. I had a 1.6 grade point average graduating from high school because I had other things to do. But this information kind of educated me along the way because I was born into it. And now I have the pieces to follow it, and hopefully Chris and maybe Oxford and will do some of the vetting for these things, and we can change the world. But if not, I'll keep doing it, and I'll do it in the next lifetime. If not this one, and the next lifetime after that. Just remember, and another thing, don't forget, you know, you go from positive to negative, everything polarizes positive to negative, then more than likely, with each lifetime, male to female, male to female, if the universe is consistent. I think it is.
Terrence Howard throws shade at traditional math on elementary particles, insisting it needs a serious reboot.
What I've done is I've figured out about 7 different elementary particles, fundamental particles. And then there were secondary generational particles that seemed to occur. And when these things began to build up more and more, they began to create their own systems. And these systems is what I brought to Oxford, because I would like for you guys to examine them, put them to test, because I bet you will find all the fundamental particles that they've been looking for in the unified theory of the universe. It's a big statement, but I've got a lot of stuff to back it up if given the opportunity to do so. But the flower of life has been opened, and when we get an opportunity, I'd love to show you some of these things. Can I go on?
Yep, you good?
Mm-hmm. I can't, without being able to show the pieces, it's a whole different monster. But all of these wave conjugations, all of these states of matter, all of these things, it's time for that to be changed now. We have changed all of our buildings to be aerodynamic. Our airplanes are no longer based on a two-dimensional Euclidean way of life, but our math is still based on a two-dimensional way. And I think in order for us to reach the future, we have to examine that. Do you guys know about loops in math? Do you believe in loops? Do you know the square root of 2? Do you think that's a loop? Any other number that above 2, that you put in and you cube and you cube and square and divide by 2, by the 6th operation, it has moved into an exponential number that you can't even imagine. Any number below 2 that you do that same operation with, it will go into an exponentially small matter and number. This is what we call a loop. It is illogical, it doesn't make sense, and it does not make math make sense. So these are some things that I'm bringing to the fore and that I would like to question. I would like to audit the math, the world of mathematics, and I would like to audit how we view the Platonic solids, because I think the new wave conjugations will tell a better story of how our world works.
Our currency system's flawed by greed, so it's time to recheck math and physics basics. But are we willing to fix the mess greed made, or just keep going the same way?
And our system of exchanging with currency is flawed because of greed. There's not like if 1 times 1 equals 2, we've got an equilibrium of balance. 1 times 1 equals 1, you've got loss. When 1 times 1 equals 3 or more, you're talking about over unity and supersymmetry. And that's how you get the universe to work for you. Instead of using just the solar voltaics off of it, you also use the piezoelectric effects of it. You use other things to make greater unity. But 1 times 1 equaling 1, when it could also equal a pound times a pound equaling a pound, when it could also equal $4 or $10 or $100, does that make sense to you? Do you think the banks are abusing that? What's a quarter times a quarter? If I ask anybody in this room, what's a quarter times a quarter? That's 25 times 25. The computer will the calculator will tell you 6.25 cents. But we know 25 pence times 25 pence is 625 pence. That's 6 pounds and 25 pence, but the computer or the banks only have to give you 6 1/4 cents reference for it. Or let's say you put a dime times a dime. Let me get this out. Say you pay a dime times a dime. You put that in your calculator, it says 1 cent. 0.10 times 0.10 is 1 cent. But we know a dime times a dime is a whole dollar. But the banks gives us money based on that evaluation. Is that fair? And this is all legal. Do you think it's not happening in the banks? This is what 1 times 1 equaling 1 has got us. This inconsistency of our monies and our economy is sitting in the balance. And the rest of our future is sitting in the balance because our science has been stunted as a result of the problems in mathematics, because math asks for the basic laws of physics to break down in order for 1 times 1 to equal 1. In order for 1 times 0 to equal nothing, laws of conservation of energy has to disappear. And math is the foundating laws of math is supposed to support the laws of physics. They are arm in arm. They cannot be in controversy with each other. So we need an audit on the platonic solids, we need an audit on the square root of 2, and we need an audit on action and reaction, or we either got to get rid of, we say 1 times 1 equals 1 and there's no action and reaction. One or the other, you can't have both. And until we make that change, we're in trouble. We're gonna be stunted as a species.
Terrence Howard says we've got it wrong about magnetism and radiation being all bad. They're actually crucial for making new stuff.
I mean, you got to remember, we've been here since the very beginning. There is no good or bad. It's just your perspective that you're sitting from. Is it beneficial for everyone around, or is it not? There's something that has to build up, and there's something that needs to tear it down. What we call the tearing of it down, we call it evil or bad, but that's the process of magnetism or radiation. Radiation tears apart that which was concentrically brought together through electric potential and electric force. Electricity is always seeking a higher pressure condition, trying to get to the center of the apex, whereas magnetism is spinning southwestward, trying to get out. But the magnetism is necessary because unless it broke apart that which was collected together, you would never have any new material to rebuild again. And that's the breathing in and the breathing out of universal purpose. Now, so at the end of the day, since the Creator made all things, and everything came from the Creator.
Right.
Terrence Howard says science just helps us understand nature, and he thinks calling something bad is all about how you see it.
Well, science is to explain natural phenomena.
Okay.
The whole point of science was to explain natural phenomena, and it should coincide with what takes place in the observable universe. And that should strengthen one's faith. And that's why I said as above, so below. So if here everything has an equal and opposite mate, and is necessary in order for the proliferation of life and the continuation of the cycle that is just sleeping, and then you refold again and you're reborn again. There is nothing that is bad except how you are perceiving it and whether it's beneficial to everyone around you, because something needs to tear things apart. The FDA had 6 different grand juries to try and indict this man. And every time they did that, he had his patients that came in there, patients that were supposed to be dead 25 years ago, that are sitting there with their entire families, saying that I am here as a result of this man's work. But if I had followed my course, my mother would still be here. But again, that's like the time traveler, he developed a time machine so he can go back and get his wife, but it was his wife that led him to build the time machine. So no matter what, he was always going to be repeating that. And I had to recognize that the universe doesn't make any mistakes. My mother was here long enough to do what she needed to do, but her passing reminded me that I had more work to do and that I was not fulfilling my true capacity. Wow. And so I stepped out to do what I needed to do, and that's with the world of science. That's just trying to illuminate and elevate our species so that we can become balanced with the universe. There's 4 levels of species. Level 1 society has complete control over his planet. And the resources, and are able to balance with it. A level 2 society would have complete control over their sun and the solar system. A level 3 society would have complete control of the galaxy and its energy and able to work with it. And level 4 society, civilization would have complete control over the universe and know how to work within it. Well, that's not possible when you have imaginary straight lines in a world, in the universe, where if all energy in the universe is expressed in motion, and all motion is expressed in waves, and all waves are curved. So it's like, where did they get the straight lines to make the platonic solids? If every action in the universe has an equal and opposite reaction, which we know it does, and therefore the greater the action, the greater the reaction, the greater the reaction, the greater the resistance, the greater the resistance, the greater the curvature. Therefore, everything has curvature. So where did they get the straight lines to make the platonic solids? When I was examining the human body and, the digits are fingers, they have the same nerves that run into our teeth. The same exact nerves. Our teeth would be fingers. They're an example. That's why you don't go and let them take your teeth out to put somebody else's pretend smile on you. But also with the human mind, over 60% of our mind is geared towards our digits, our hands. So if you're only writing with one hand, you're losing half of your brain's potential. And if our legs behave the way our hands behave, where only one leg was dominant, then we would be crippled. And so I started writing when I was a teenager. I started writing backwards first I started writing with my left hand. Then I was like, why am I only writing in one direction? And what I found when I switched from my right hand to my left hand, that it was a different personality. It was a different kind of writing. It was like my brain had reversed itself. But then when I started writing backwards, it polarized.